looking like breeze.
Hello, and welcome to the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast. Here on AIM, we invite industry professionals and subject matter experts on to discuss current trends and technology topics. Today, we're going to be talking about network security with Palo Alto. With us today are Tom O'Brien, VP GotoMarket in Network Security, and Sal Maita, Director GotoMarket Hardware. Gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Excellent. Thanks for having us today.
So when we talk about network security, that is just a massive, massive topic. In terms of security, a lot of times what people are really concerned about is the data, right? Because if their data gets taken, whether it's exfiltrated by a malicious actor from the outside or an internal actor, that's the biggest thing that is going to raise red flags and problems for a company. So what do you see or what do you think that companies should be doing to monitor their data and try to control where it goes and, above all, make sure that it doesn't leave the organization?
Yeah, Chris, that's a great point. We're a network security company, but it's not securing the network. We got to secure the businesses that run on these networks, whether they're private, public, cloud networks, or enterprise networks. And the data, the information is really what's most valuable. And today, the threat actors are highly motivated and highly financed to go after that data. The rise of ransomware, just the last 2 or 3 years, has been unprecedented in the financing of the threat actors being able to attack and try to steal and exfiltrate data from your networks has been really kind of a perfect storm, where you've got ransomware, that the sophistication of the attackers is escalated, and you've got your Bitcoin and your cyber currency being a very easy way to extort money from people without being able to trace. And that, combined with customers moving to cloud-enabled networks or moving to a work-from-home environment, the last 2 years has been very, very profitable for cyber threat actors to attack and trying to exfiltrate information from your enterprise. And in fact, I just heard that the cyber criminal industry is the biggest illegal industry ahead of drug trade in terms of the amount of dollars in revenue from the cyber thefts. So really a big topic, and protecting your data is the key there, Chris.
I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I think I saw something where ransomware went up like 75% just in the first quarter of last year, and the ending numbers must have been staggering. What are you seeing that companies are trying to do to defend against this type of thing?
The strategic direction, and this is a journey that we have to work and take with our customers, is to move to a zero trust architecture. It's a journey. It's continuing to reduce risk of ransomware, to put the steps in place to actually move to a zero trust environment. That's the journey that we're taking with most of our large clients, large and small, because being able to reduce that attack vector through a zero trust architecture is top of mind. In fact, there was a recent presidential executive order here in the US on improving the nation's cybersecurity. And there was a mandate in there that the federal government must adopt security best practices and advance towards a zero trust architecture. So zero trust is a very big topic for us today in the industry.
What exactly is zero trust?
Yeah, it's a buzzword, Chris, and I'll give you our definition. I'll tell you a little story about how I explain it to practitioners and IT professionals. So first is the way that Palo Alto Networks defines zero trust is we think it's a strategic approach. So it's not a product. You can't buy zero trust. It's a journey of an approach to cybersecurity that really secures an organization by eliminating implicit trust and continuously validating every stage of the digital interaction. So really eliminating the implicit trust, which is developed in network security over the last decade and a half, where if you were in the core data center, if you were inside the perimeter of a corporation, you were trusted because you were inside the perimeter. And that implicit trust was how a lot of network security architectures were built. And we're really turning that on its head and saying you need to trust no one and verify all. And the story I use, Chris, to kind of to explain this is a couple of decades ago, I was in New York. My wife and I were up in New York going to a Broadway show. And as we were checking in to see the play, there was a lot of buzz in the air. We went to the desk and we got our will call tickets. I showed my ID, right? So I got my authentication. I was inside the perimeter. I went through a security check to get X-rayed to go into the theater. And we were inside the theater, and we were through that layer of corporate security that exists today in our companies, that once you get inside, you're trusted. And we sat down for the play, and we had good seats. It was towards the front, and we noticed 4 rows ahead of us was the then sitting president of the United States, Bill Clinton, and his wife Hillary and his daughter Chelsea. And they were seeing the play, and it was kind of an exciting night. We were watching it with them, and at the intermission, I said to my wife, I'm going to go introduce myself to Bill Clinton. He's the president of the United States. So I moved forward, and this is where it ties back to zero trust. I moved forward to shake hands with the president, and Secret Service, they actually stopped that interaction, right? They were the verification and validation. I had access to the data center. I had access to the corporate network. I was inside the play, but I didn't have access to walk up to the president unannounced and put my arm out. So they stepped in, they stopped that interaction. And that's what I define as zero trust, right? Verifying, validating every transaction, every user, that they should be doing what they're doing. And the good news is security did clear me, and I was able to shake hands with the president. But that's the interaction of not trusting just because we're inside the perimeter of your corporate data center, but verifying every transaction, every user, and every application. And that's how we defined in the industry today what truly zero trust is about.
Right. So it's a long way from just throwing money and expertise at the outside firewall. You're trying to take a look at every single interaction inside the firewall as well.
Yeah, there's really 3 things we want to verify: the user, the application, and the infrastructure. And this is a perfect time for your customers to really reconsider how they develop and deliver security in this infrastructure world, because there's 3 really big transformations going on. First of all, there's a huge network transformation going on with customers as their users move to a work from home, right? This pandemic where everyone shifted to work from home is going to be more of a permanent hybrid going forward, right? Your customers, your clients, your partners, and your employees need to have a seamless experience, whether they're in the network, in the corporate data center, if they're a Starbucks, or if they're somewhere internationally traveling, right? The second big transformation that's creating an opportunity to rethink how you deliver security is, as you know, with cloud, the data center has moved and the applications are moved to the cloud, whether that's a SASE application, whether it's a hosted AWS or Google or Azure application, the apps are now in the cloud. And then the final really opportunity for you to redesign how you deliver security is there's a huge transformation for automation. With these threat actors we talked about at the beginning, attacking with ransomware, they're coming at you at automation and machine learning, and to be able to have an automated response to that is really what's required. I'll throw this over to Sal for a second. So Sal, tell us a little about securing users with zero trust. So I talked about the fact that we want to be able to secure the network, the data center moving to the cloud, and the SecOps, but it's really to be able to secure users, applications, and infrastructure. So let's start with users and tell me what considerations we want to have there.
Yeah, so there's really, 4 things that we want to look at, Tom. We want to verify the identity of that user. We want to verify the device and the workload that device is trying to access. And then we also want to, and I mentioned access, we also want to enforce least privilege access for workloads. And lastly, and you've mentioned this a couple times, we want to verify that transaction is one that user has permission to go ahead and do. So when you take a look at the identity, the device, the access, and then the transaction, and verify all those from a user perspective, that's how you start building on that zero trust for the users themselves.
Now, the same question for applications, right? What are the 4 pillars that you want to look at when you're securing applications in a zero trust architecture?
And it's going to sound a little redundant here, but we want to do the same things. We want to make sure that those applications that you've identified that are coming in from and through a device that you already approved, and that application actually has permission and the access to conduct that transaction. So it sounds very much like the users, but it's just that, right? It's from an application perspective. So when a threat gets inside the data center, maybe they're acting as an application. Do they really have access to that next application, right? Do they have access to that data that resides in the cloud? Do they have access to that data that resides, behind the firewall? And you want to verify, across all of those areas from an application perspective as well.
And finally, infrastructure, which is where I think predominantly people think about network security, is securing the infrastructure, and it is foundational to the overall architecture with zero trust. So tell me about how we view at Palo Alto Networks securing infrastructure with zero trust. What are the key elements there?
Yeah, again, you've got to validate all the users with access to the infrastructure. Then you want to identify all the devices, including, one of the biggest areas of growth right now across a lot of the infrastructures is IoT. And so you absolutely want to make sure you've got a secure environment from that perspective. There's lots of ways for people to get inside behind the firewall through some of those IoT devices. So you want to absolutely lock those down. And then you also want to, on the access side, you want to incorporate least privilege access segmentation for the native and third-party infrastructure. And then when you're conducting that transaction, you're going to make sure you're scanning all the content. So, get rid of that implied trust and make sure that, within the infrastructure, you're looking for any of that malicious activity and data theft.
Yeah, so that really tees up the overall perspective of how to go to zero trust. And as outlined in the executive order, no security professional is really going to challenge that these foundational hygiene level ambitious goals are all right, the North Star, but it's hard to get there. What are some of the industry leaders doing to make this easier, Chris? We'll walk through that now because it's a journey, but if it's really hard to achieve all this visibility and zero trust architecture, the listener here is thinking, how do I get there? How do I start? And we'll talk about some of the tools, some of the techniques, and some of the things that the industry leaders like Palo Alto Networks have been doing to make a zero trust environment easier to consume. And we'll start with the same three pillars we talked about, right? The users, the applications, and the infrastructure. And talking about the users, one of the challenges that verifying the identity most of your enterprise customers have is, through acquisition, through growth, through different transitions in the infrastructure, most customers have multiple SSO providers, multiple identity and access management providers. How do you have a consolidated view of a user to be able to establish whether that user can connect to and has access to an application? And tools that are true layer 7 visibility, where you can understand the user, can understand the app, the application that they're connecting through, and then being able to write security controls specific to that user, specific to that application, is really foundational to a zero trust architecture. And I know there's a lot of enterprise security providers out there that offer more of a traditional layer 3 approach that doesn't look at the user or the application, but more often points to an IP address or a website. This now moving to a true layer 7 approach with a next generation firewall that gives that visibility to the user and the application really transforms. And I'll give you an example. A large pharmaceutical client, and they're working on sequencing and doing research and development around genomics and doing all sorts of advanced research, and they don't want to have the people who are in the sales department access to those R&D labs. And you don't want to have the finance people allow access to anything other than their finance system. So being able to identify the user, the application, and then being able to tie the two together is really a foundational layer to a zero trust architecture. And make sure you're looking for your vendor that's providing enterprise security to make sure you have that visibility to the user and the application to be able to write rules that enable that. And finally, another innovation that's happened within this market segment and what Palo Alto Networks does very, very well is if you have multiple identity providers, being able to integrate, whether it's from Okta or Google or Azure or Ping, to be able to offer integration to multiple SSO providers, multiple identity access management providers, really gives you an advantage in being able to have an integrated system that verifies the user at the front door. So, once again, getting back to the core for zero trust, being able to have that user verified, being able to have a user that's supposed to access an application allowed and deny all else is really one of the foundations to building a zero trust for user architecture. Same type of techniques are also used for applications. Now, the trick here is that many of your customers' applications and many of your applications are in the cloud. How do I have consistent visibility, policy, and be able to access a application that's cloud-based. And that's really where you want to have additional capabilities by having firewalls, virtual firewalls in your cloud provider, to be able to have the inspection, to be able to see that access, to see that absolute connectivity between the user and the application if they're not in the data center. If they're in the cloud, whether it's from Google or from Microsoft or from AWS, to be able to have that virtual firewall provide that visibility is another key tenet here. I'll expand here a little more on how that's made easier with some capabilities from Palo Alto Networks, is being able to migrate rules from legacy tools, being able to take some of your traditional approaches, which were more of an IP address target application, and being able to have an assessment of those rules and have policy that's written specific to user and application. And we built in tools into our product to be able to enable that migration. So once again, the zero trust for applications, very consistent with being able to have visibility to that application, allowing a rule set that's written to allow users to attack to that rule. And finally, the infrastructure layer. Zero trust for infrastructure, also, just as equally as important. I'll focus on an area here in the infrastructure that's taking a look at the transaction, right? Being able to look at the actual flow in the network. And one of the core fundamentals to having access to the core transaction is you want to really reduce your risk to phishing, malicious websites, DNS attacks, DLP requirements are important here. You want to be able to unpack that data flow. And most of the traffic that your customers and you are using are oftentimes encrypted. So being able to have decryption is another core tenet to zero trust. If you don't have visibility to the traffic, it makes it very, very difficult to defend against the adversary. And it makes it very, very difficult to understand if the threat actors are attaching a command and control, if they're delivering malware and malicious files to the environment. So being able to have a decryption engine to be able to have visibility to your entire traffic flow really is a fundamental core part of zero trust for infrastructure.
I think there's probably a little bit more you can go in depth here. And I think when you visualize what this looks like, because it's sort of hard to see it in a podcast, is that organizations are probably buying a lot of different products to try to solve for this, right? So the idea here is that you put together a story for the organization that provides an end-to-end solution, right? But it's not just a product, right? There's a lot of pieces that go into this. And so maybe you can give us a little bit more on the infrastructure, and then give us a little bit more on, as to, why is it better to not go out and maybe buy, different point products to solve for some of the things you were just talking about, and why it fits better in a zero trust strategy if you look at it from a Palo Alto perspective.
Yeah, it's a great point, Sal. And really, if you think about how most security vendors have evolved, right? A lot of point products in the security industry, where you would have one product that just did URL filtering to be able to block malicious websites. You'd have one product that you would use just to do sandboxing, which is to do advanced malware analysis, to actually take a file before it's delivered to your user and be able to run that file to see if it's got malicious content or not. Sandboxing, a real important part of security. Oftentimes, a IDS or IPS to be able to do intrusion detection and prevention was bought from an additional company, separate provider. And then you had your DLP provider that was separate from that. And then your antivirus and anti-spyware. So you may have in a traditional network infrastructure, 7 or 8 different security providers trying to look at that content and assess and really unpack that packet to see what's in that packet and be able to do that, to be able to provide a security control. Next generation firewall, and Palo Alto Networks is one of the leaders there, is actually the combination of all those functionality from 6 or 7 different security vendors consolidated on one platform. And the huge advantage to the customer is not only do they have efficiency in operations to have one security provider, one console, one policy, but you also get the performance advantage where you're not running multiple stacks of network gear that are going to impact your performance. So really operational advantage, better security, reduction of risk, and that also is a key tenet to operational efficiency, being able to have one provider with a policy that's consistent across the URL, across sandboxing, across phishing from one vendor. And if you don't have visibility to all that traffic through SSL decryption, it makes providing all those security controls, basically you're flying blind with one hand behind your back if you can't decrypt and don't have visibility. So doing the decryption and all the security controls in one integrated solution, what we see the big direction in the industry going today.
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of the core principles in zero trust, especially zero trust architecture. And one of those is obviously reducing the risk of zero-day attacks, ransomware, and command and control. And so can you tell us more about maybe some of the latest industry innovations that are helping to reduce that ransomware risk? I know that Chris mentioned that even in the very beginning of the conversation we had here.
We've had an industry that's developed a response to malicious threat actors with web-based attacks by creating a database of all the malicious IP addresses globally. That's been a traditional way that we've stopped or tried to stop the adversaries from attacking and really deploying command and control, being able to set up malicious URLs and malicious websites, and being able to attack your environment with really targeted phishing, where a single user can click one link. That one user then becomes patient zero. They go to a website that is malicious, and then content is then downloaded to your environment. And that approach of having a database that lists all those malicious URLs has really become obsolete in today's threat actor environment. We actually see that threat actors, they will spin up a URL just for one attack. They will purchase and buy URLs and IP addresses that aren't navigatable by crawlers. They have malicious content that's hidden through cloaking. And these attacks are very difficult, if not impossible, to stop with traditional URL filtering databases. As the leader in network security, Palo Alto Networks came out with an advanced way to attack this by providing actually machine learning and analysis of the actual web traffic to defeat these evasions and to be able to actually provide real-time enhancements to URL protection. And it's really changed the game. We did some analysis with our internal threat research team, Unit 42, and we did some comparisons of a traditional database trying to block URLs from threat actors compared to the new advanced URL capability. And it was shown that 48% of the malicious URL websites that threat actors were deploying was not blocked in a 3-day period of more of a traditional database approach. So another shift here for people to consider. If you're going to be looking to reduce your risk of ransomware, reduce your risk of threat actors, looking at a more advanced capability that includes machine learning and artificial intelligence is really now a requirement to be able to reduce your risk. It's a shift in being able to take something that was 48% ineffective and reduce that risk with an advanced capability set. So that's been a recent trend in the industry in being able to reduce the threat of risk of ransomware and be able to reduce those command and control sites. So really important part of securing, once again, users, applications, and infrastructure to really make zero trust actionable. So Chris, I know we did a lot of talking. Any final questions or things you wanted to make sure we covered in today's discussion?
Yeah, and thanks for all that. That's very valuable information. One question that immediately comes to mind is, let's just say you're talking to a customer that doesn't have zero trust in their environment. Since this is relatively new and it's a different perspective, it's a strategy, a deployment model, if you will. Some people might not know where to start, and they might not even think it's necessary for their company because, I don't know, they're too small or they're already hidden. What are some of the things that you've heard in terms of people being concerned or afraid to get started with zero trust, and how do you respond to them?
I'll take the second part of the question you asked in there is, are customers too small? We've seen law firms, very small law firms get attacked by these cyber threat actors. We've seen grocery stores, we've seen schools, local school districts being attacked by these threat actors. And most businesses today, no matter how small or large, run on their infrastructure. And with ransomware, being able to have a threat actor try to take down and hold for ransom your data and infrastructure is created the opportunity where there is no opportunity too small for these threat actors because they're deploying at cloud scale. So the second part of the question, am I too small for this? No. Threat actor is going to come after you, whether you're a small environment or a large environment, with the same vigor, because it's profitable, because they've seen success there and they've seen the ransoms paid. But back to the first question, where do we start? Well, I think this is where Anexinet's a really great partner for us, is because you really want to start with just a current state assessment, understand where you are, right? To know where you want to go, you've got to find out where you are to start with. So a quick assessment is something that we offer together with our partner ecosystem to be able to deliver a quick assessment of your environment. And foundationally, the starting point is really we talked about it all day, right? Is to make sure you take advantage of a user-based approach, an application-based approach, and an infrastructure-based approach to be able to identify and verify and not assume just because they're on their corporate network that they should have access to that application, that they should have access to that database, and being able to enforce that, have policy written to that, is really the starting point. And that's, as I mentioned, it sometimes is difficult. And that's where, we've been doing this for a decade. We've got 85,000 customers. We've helped customers take advantage with tools that allow applications to be identified automatically, tools that allow user identification integration with your existing identity and access management system. So you can bring some automation and you can start the journey and start reducing risk, which really is facing all enterprises globally in 2022.
When it comes to the users, one thing we hear about a lot talking about this type of thing is the seesaw between convenience and security. How does Zero Trust impact the end user experience or the average employee experience?
That's a great question. And really, technology has been, and we've been innovating ahead of that curve, right? Physical infrastructure had been a barrier to be able to provide seamless security to customers and users without impacting performance. And I'll give you an example. Traditional VPN architectures, traditionally, those VPN controls would be located in headquarters locations. And if you were dialing into an application from a laptop and you were traveling, you could be dialing in from, let's say, Chicago. But if your company is headquartered in New Jersey, oftentimes you would have to log in through VPN. We've all done this. You log in back to corporate, and then those security controls were then centrally located at that core data center, and you then had a secure connection. Today, with cloud enablement, all the capabilities that I was talking about today, with being able to identify the application and the workload and the content, is delivered as a service from the cloud. So when you log into your local database from Chicago, if you're traveling, you're going to go back to your corporate database, we actually then provide a local connectivity through a local access point through the cloud that then improves your performance and doesn't sacrifice security. This has been an innovation that's happened in the last 3 to 4 years and has been really offering the consistent security and high performance because you're connecting through a local cloud.
And I like that we keep going back and forth in terms of the conversation. Infrastructure is just a very generalized term from what I've been hearing. Considering the world we live in is so spread out, hybrid cloud is a big thing, multi-cloud is a big thing. How does Zero Trust interact when the environment that a workload is hosted on could be anywhere? It could be on-prem, it could be in the cloud, it could be a combination of both. It could change from week to week or month to month.
Yeah, and that is absolutely why you need to be vigilant when you're looking at your security solutions, to look at a platform that isn't just physical hardware, right? Isn't just data center centric or isn't just cloud centric, but is a hybrid, because your users are hybrid, right? To be able to have a same security policy, whether the user is inside that corporate data center, is dialing in from a local VPN connection, or accessing a SaaS application from a remote location. You want to have consistent policy, and you want to have consistent access and consistent customer and user experience, no matter where they're dialed in from. So yeah, looking for your security provider that's not just hardware centric, not just cloud centric, but delivers that same as a service model that your customers, your end users are expecting.
And a system like this, with all of the different checks and balances and security that people have to go through, or users should have to go through, I should say, what kind of advantages does that give to a company or an organization when it comes to monitoring and management and keeping track of things and, actually seeing the security in action, as it were, the mythical one single pane of glass type of viewpoint.
Yeah, you've hit it, right? It's moving towards automation and AI ops, right? To be able to have automation in your security operations, to be able to have the visibility and consistency to understand and be able to reproduce any of the traffic flow that's happened, right? So automation is a really big part of this equation. We really didn't talk much about it, but being able to respond to threat actors in the environment is equally as important. You try to reduce the risk of ransomware, but you can't eliminate it. So having automation in your security ops, which I think is something Anexinet does very, very well, automation and security operations as a service is something that also is an important part of this kind of process.
Right. And the advantage there is that type of automation, that type of machine learning is going to be able to respond so much faster than a human security engineer ever possibly could.
Yeah. When you're talking about 10,000 alerts per hour, you can't address those, right? So you have to have the ability to have automation in your security control to be able to automatically block, to be able to automatically, without a lot of false positives, right? You don't want to block business, be able to block those threat actors without having to have a security analyst involved.
All right. I think that's pretty much everything that I had. As we wrap up here, I'll give you guys both an opportunity for any final thoughts. Sal, I'll start with you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the time here. I think that as you're talking, as your customers are listening to this and as your sales teams are talking to their customers, I think go back to one of the things that Tom said is, let's use some of the tools that we both have together to understand sort of where you are in this journey. And then I think it's easy to make recommendations and create the plan. The hard part is just, getting everybody, the finances and everything else lined up. But I know that when we work with folks like your sales teams, we always figure out a way to make those types of things happen.
And Chris, I would basically say, particularly we were talking about early here, January of 2022, right? Every journey starts with a first step, and take that first step, right? And it's not as daunting a task as you see. We've had great success helping customers reduce their risk, improve their security posture, take costs out of their business, and really take advantage of all this innovation and capability we've been talking about today. It's not that daunting of a task. We can help you get there together.
All right. I think that pretty much wraps it up then. Tom, Sal, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
This has been the Anexinet Infrastructure Modernization Podcast, a production of Anexinet. Subscribe for free through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite listening app. Let's keep the conversation going. Follow us on social media, visit us online at anexinet.com, or contact us at info@anexinet.com. Anexinet, empowering what's next.